Be sink or swim this year with the Oklahoma Sooners. Brent Venables going into his fourth year, and there's been a serious amount of turbulence, all things considered, for this football program because I think for the most part there was a lot of excitement going into the Venables hire. I mean, he knows how to recruit. He's a brilliant defensive mind, and right now just everything just simply hasn't come together. And for the second straight year, they're going to have a new offensive coordinator after Jeff Lebby left for the Mississippi State job. The Seth Lentrell experiment dash co-offensive coordinators with Finley and what's his face didn't really work out. Defensive coordinator, they're gonna have to do that all over again. And Jackson Arnold was, for the most part, a disappointment. I go back and think about that Tennessee game where he threw 3 interceptions. Then Michael Hawkins kind of came in and looked decent until he kind of shit the bed too. Then they had a flop back and forth between Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins for the rest of the season. And I think we all know what the narrative with Oklahoma is, right? They've made 26 straight bowl appearances. They are the pillar of consistency in a number of different ways. I mean, you go back and you think the days of Bob Stoops where they were consistently contending for Big 12 championships and putting together programs that are national championship worthy. They gravely miss Dylan Gabriel right now. Jeff Lebby, I don't think gets enough respect and appreciation. I think now that he's at Mississippi State, he's kind of under the radar a little bit, and just a guy that we don't really sit there and talk about as much. But the thing about Oklahoma is a lot of people pin this on Jackson Arnold. And yes, I think he kind of was supposed to be the sort of savior for the team in the sense of, well, he's a really good runner. He's got a cannon for an arm, and he's got all the potential in the world to really make a legitimate difference. And quite frankly, it didn't work out for a couple of reasons. I think first and foremost, Jackson Arnold looked really overwhelmed at the beginning of the season. But outside of that, the wide receiver room was largely a disappointment. I think to a large degree, they relied upon Bauer Sharp way too often for him to get open and for him to kind of essentially be the one and only playmaker. I mean, it's not like they have any tight ends on the team that can really make a difference. And really outside of the 1 and 2 spots for Oklahoma, there's not really much depth at all. And not to mention too, that they had a really serious injury bug towards the middle of the season too, that definitely didn't help at all. I mean, you can even see that in terms of the offensive line as well, where they were replacing a number of different guys. And yes, Jackson Arnold was pressured this, that, or the other, but it doesn't help too that he's sitting there getting sacked on every other play. I mean, definitely one of the highest sack rates in all of college football. And if Oklahoma wants to stand any chance at being a program where they're back to winning 10, 11 games and being in a New Year's bowl game type of situation, that's going to have to be resolved. And quite frankly, I'm not entirely sold on this Oklahoma program right now. I am excited about Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer, who are making the transition from Washington State to come over to the SEC with Oklahoma. I would argue he's probably is the most important player going to 2025 because it is nice that you're able to keep Michael Hawkins, and he is going to be a guy that can improve and can develop a little bit and kind of learn behind him too, especially since Mateer does have a lot of experience starting right now. And in many ways, he has a pretty similar skill set to Jackson Arnold in the sense of, yes, he's not going to be necessarily the guy that's going to be scrambling on every play, which, by the way, I think is another concern that they have is Jackson Arnold had the most carries for Oklahoma last season. And the only other guy, Barnes, who had about 570 rushing yards. So for him and Arnold to combine for 1,000 yards, I mean, that is just simply not good enough too. And granted, I think we are going to see Oklahoma pass the ball even more this season, given this kind of the general depth that they have at the position now. They brought in a couple transfers who I think can make an immediate presence, but it's still such a large question mark for this program too, because I think we can all agree that for the most part, the backbone, the identity, the culture of the team has always been solidified on that defense too, right? Because you think about all the production that's coming back. I think of Mason Thomas and Demonic Williams and Peyton Bauer and Robert Spears and all those dudes who I think are going to make a real legitimate presence, because that front seven for Oklahoma is scary. They get to the quarterback. They kept that team in a number of games this year. And quite frankly, if you go back and watch that Alabama game where they won 24-3, they were just a menace to Jalen Milroe, to the point where they just had absolutely zero answers to that whatsoever. But what makes me nervous about Oklahoma's defense in particular is I think the secondary definitely has a good amount of room to improve, particularly the number of explosive plays that they gave up last year. And it's just a very top heavy team in the sense of both their cornerbacks are not going to be there this year. So you're replacing a couple guys there. And it just seems like you're just going to be relying on a bunch of people that, for the most part, are going to be serious question marks for you going into the season. Because, like I said, I'm not going to doubt Brent Venables defensively as a play caller, as a coach, as a recruiter. None of those things, I don't, at least for me, I'm not going to sit there and debate and wonder about. And however, what I'm more concerned about is, as I look at this schedule here, Oklahoma, another top 10 schedule in terms of difficulty. But what you do have going for you is, to me, the big question is going to be that September 6th game versus Michigan. And yes, I get that it's not it's a non-conference game and it's early into the season. But at the same time, Michigan and Oklahoma are kind of in a similar spot. And what I mean by that is, Michigan and Oklahoma are two teams whose front sevens have really been the backbone for them their entire 2024 campaign. And now going into 2025, Bryce Underwood is presumably going to be the starter for Michigan. And for Oklahoma, you have John Mateer. And it's just going to be fascinating to see which offense really steps up to. And granted, it definitely helps that you do have Michigan at home this year. You don't have to travel to the big house, which I do think is going to be a big deal. But if they really want to turn some heads and really solidify themselves as, hey, we're back and we're not just going to be this 500 team anymore, they're going to have to make a statement versus a Michigan team, which I'm not going to sit there and say is vulnerable necessarily. But if this new offense with Ben Arbuckle can really click, and John Mateer can put up the numbers that he did while at Washington State, I think it could be a really fun ride for them to watch this year. Because, I mean, when you have 44 touchdowns, 29 passing, 15 rushing, and just 7 interceptions, I think there's a lot of elements for that, quite frankly, we really didn't see it all from Oklahoma last year, especially when, Seth Lintrell was your play caller and he was at North Texas, and that didn't really work out. And it just didn't seem like a good marriage altogether, especially since kind of the athletes that Lintrell needs in order to, maximize his offense simply weren't there either. So that Michigan game is obviously going to be a big test. But even jumping forward a little bit, I mean, obviously the October 11th, the Cotton Bowl at Dallas is always going to be a tough game. Granted, Texas gave Oklahoma a big ass whooping last year, and we definitely need to see if they can put up a little bit more respectable performance this year. And then, granted, you're going to have to go down to South Carolina. I think this is going to be a tough stretch. You have Texas, then you're on the road versus South Carolina, then you host Ole Miss, and then you're at Tennessee, and then you get a bye week, and then you're at Alabama. I think that is going to be a challenge for this Oklahoma Sooners football program. And in many ways, it's really going to test to see, is Brent Venables really going to be the answer for this program? Because they're at the point now where it's going to be sink or swim going into year 4. And the expectations in Norman are definitely, I mean, they're definitely not going to give you a mulligan just because your quarterback wasn't ideal or because your wide receiver room wasn't there. They expect answers immediately. And yes, they have made a couple of signings in the transfer portal, and their recruiting class is going to be another big question mark too, because we're so used to them being a top 10 recruiting class. However, they're 17th this year. So they've taken a little bit of a step back in the recruiting trail. Majority of their defensive production is going to come back, particularly on the front seven. They're adding another couple guys. The cornerback room is going to be a work in progress. I don't know how much we've seen in terms of the wide receiver and the tight end room. However, they are going to face a number of challenges this year. And if Brent Venables wants to, be a legitimate threat in the SEC, we're going to have to see much more from them than we did last year. But fortunately, you have John Mateer, who I think is the real deal, 100% legit, and somebody I think who could be a legitimate difference maker for you guys, even though we don't really see much of a running back room at all there too. But again, you have a really good defense to rely upon. Yes, you do have some challenges in terms of your schedule. However, if they can clean up the offensive line, even just a little bit to the point where Mateer has enough time to drop back, not be pressured every 5 seconds and get some big explosive plays, that would definitely be a big step in the right direction.